All right. Hi there, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today titled Maximizing ADCMS Grant Opportunities. I'm Nick Frank, producer at Trimble. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. We're going to give a couple minutes for everybody to log into the webinar. And while we do that, I'll get to a couple housekeeping items before we get to our lovely speakers for today's presentation. As we dive into our housekeeping, the webinar today should take about an hour. That does include the Q&A portion at the end. Now, to make sure we keep the flow of this webinar going, all attendees are going to be on mute for the duration of the presentation, but that doesn't mean you can't submit questions or participate. The question panel is open during the entirety of the presentation, so feel free to throw any questions in during any part of the presentation. Our esteemed panel of presenters will get to as many as possible once we get to the end. Now, if you want to share this presentation with other colleagues or individuals that you think this would be valuable to, the webinar recording is going to be sent out to you automatically within the next handful of days. So if you have another colleague that says, hey, this might be a presentation for you, we will be sending this out in the next couple days. We do have one poll question here during the presentation, so please partake in that. It's going to give us some good information, and then I'll have our panel comment on the results. And of course, stick around after the conclusion of the presentation. We do have a post-webinar survey at the end of the presentation that you can participate in so that we can get a little bit more information from you. Let's get to our speakers for today. Starting from left to right, we've got Pat Holtz. He leads the Trimble team that works with state departments of transportation, MPOs, and localities in implementing the grant opportunities within U.S. Surface Transportation Bill and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Now, this includes our topic for today, Advanced Digital Construction Management System Grants, ADCMS. Pat's professional background is in government relations, legislative advocacy, and business development in the transportation industry. Doug Reichert is a 15-year veteran of the AECO technology business, having worked extensively in vertical and horizontal construction infrastructure. Well, that's this guy's expertise and passion. As the Director of Industry Strategy for State Federal Government at Trimble, he serves the industry as a thought leader for digital transformation in all forms of transportation and infrastructure. And Stacy Maynard writes grants and develops project proposals for transportation infrastructure projects in the owner and public sector at Trimble. She monitors federal grant programs and policy initiatives related to transportation, sustainability, and innovative technologies. Previously, she worked with international trade associations in Washington, D.C., securing federal funding for market development activities in over 100 different countries and acting as a liaison with government agencies, industry trade groups, and congressional staff. A great panel we have today. Let's get to our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to share some things related to this really important grant program. It's been a labor of love for a lot of people to get this ADCMS language into the EJA bill. We're excited to talk about it in more detail today. We'll start by, I'll do a little bit of a background on kind of like the current state of the industry. We'll spend some time on why you should apply for this funding, and through example, give you some things to think about as to why it matters, and you know, it's money that's there that you can go get and start your digital journey. And then we'll do a little bit of an overview of the NOFO, and then get real specific on how this team here can help you. So the purpose of this whole experience today is to dig into ADCMS in more detail and explain how specifically Trimble can support you in your submissions for your agency, and kind of the why behind this is this guidance from the Federal Highways Administration around asset lifecycle management. And there have been multiple federal highways initiatives such as EDC 6 and whatnot that kind of bring up the use of technology to better deliver transportation programs. We'll talk a little bit about some of that today, but the net is there's money here for you to take, and it's a win-win for everyone involved if you get a chance to submit, and you can acquire technology to get you on your path. So let's start by kind of digging into, you know, what is the current state of our industry right now? We're in an interesting spot, right? Let's talk about a problem. the most common problem I hear from departments of transportation, any type of transportation agency, is that there's a data problem. And that, what does that mean? Well, agencies have tons of data, and it often lives in kind of disparate dark corners. And the hardest part about figuring out how to, like, we got the data, but are we getting any value out of it? So transportation agencies spend a lot of money acquiring this data. And if they aren't taking it and making use of it, it's not really very valuable to anybody. And what this chart kind of shows, which I find pretty fascinating myself, and yes, I'm a total nerd about this stuff, uh, but the journey starts in planning and continues through the life cycle of an asset, right? Finishing with operate and maintain. But what this chart shows is the amount of information, and then at the transfer points and the handovers between the different stages, you lose a lot of that data. And the reason for this, and this is a huge focus for the Federal Highways Administration right now in their guidance around asset lifecycle management, is because of the lack of interoperability between your systems at your agency. And we could be talking about financial data in a design model, to environmental studies and planning, that none of it's informing the different processes down the line. It makes it hard to make good decisions, and it makes it more difficult to actually manage and maintain those assets over the life cycle. So further kind of exacerbating the challenge, right? Now we got Egypt, all right? There's $1.2 trillion out there, $400 billion just specific to roads and bridges, generational funding opportunity. And now what does that mean? Well, you've got all this money. Now you've got to execute more projects. 85% of construction owners are expecting significant increases in project volume. And just looking at ARTBA data and from Dodge Construction Network data, clearly more project awards are happening now than ever before, climbing quarterly in the 20 to 25%, some areas even more, as much as 30% on a quarterly basis. And certainly there's $40 billion out there for just bridge repair and replace projects. On top of that, the expectation is that you're going to be more accountable in delivering these programs. So there's more data available than ever, and everybody wants to get their hands on it. And as part of that, the tracking and reporting and overall transparency of the projects that you're managing and running, you have an all-time high on reporting that you have to deliver in order to be able to execute these programs and get funding. And here's the real hard part, right? You got a more complicated environment. You have more money than ever and more projects to execute than ever, and you don't have the people to execute them. People are retiring. It's different. We can't get the people into the industry fast enough to get them to actually execute these programs. So the net is you need to transform digitally. You need to change your workflows from anything paper related to digital. That doesn't mean you're going from hand marked up paper drawings as an as-built to PDF markups as an as-built. We're talking a model and actually creating digital as-builts per the guidance in EDC 6 from Federal Highways. So when we talk about asset lifecycle management, these are the things that come up. You've got digital project delivery, you've got enterprise asset management and connected data environment that add up to ALM. We call it ALM, asset lifecycle management. Our contemporaries, some of them have different acronyms that they use, but the purpose of this is to describe the life cycle, the continuum of an asset, starting in pre-design all the way through the life cycle of the asset. We internally created this document to emphasize the design, build, operate, and maintain continuum. But if you notice, the thing in the middle is it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. The connected data environment, without data being able to flow bidirectionally throughout that process and that continuum of the asset lifecycle, things like true digital project delivery, asset lifecycle management, BIM, enterprise asset management. To do all that stuff digitally, you have to have connected data environment to make the data move around and be where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, in the format that it needs to be in. So if you don't want to take our word for it, this is the guidance from the Federal Highways Administration. You see the thing right in the middle of that. Common, they call it a common data environment. We did a twist on it, call it a connected data environment, but because we feel like it's a better descriptor of what it really is. But similar continuum, design, construction, operate, and maintain, their guidance aligns with our guidance. And we've specifically built our solution sets and the way that we inform our customers about this stuff around what Federal Highways is saying. So let's cut to the chase on ADCMS. Like, why would you do this? What is the benefit of it? Interoperability is not just important to people at Trimble, it's important to your agency, and it's important to the Federal Highways Administration as a linchpin for how data needs to move in between systems. And not just Trimble within Trimble, but Trimble within our contemporary systems too. Whether it's Autodesk or Esri, it's imperative. And then we're working with those folks to make those things happen. You can use this money to purchase this technology. That's the point. You can use things like automated machine guidance, automate the information coming in from the field into your internal systems so that you can report on them easier using the solutions that you have. And then the last one, which as we kind of get into the details of the grant program more, decreasing your environmental footprint, sustainability, equity, these things are all going to play into your submission, because if they don't, you're not going to win. So super important, and we're going to get much deeper than this in a minute. I got like 2 more slides and then we'll go. So this is what, just at a high level, no products named, but this is the way Trimble defines asset lifecycle management. And these bullet points are just workflows, right? They're just examples of workflows that, yes, there's Trimble solutions involved in them, but my goodness, it's not just us. It's all of the other solutions that you use as an agency to execute your STIP and your TIP. So that said, without the thing at the end is the thing that counts, and the thing at the bottom is the thing that counts. If you have aspirations for digital twins or digital project delivery, with digital twin being the ultimate deliverable, you can't do it unless the data can move around the way it needs to move around in non-proprietary formats and be where it needs to be so that it can be consumed to inform better decisions and better outcomes. And so the purpose of this slide, you notice we've got our contemporaries up there, some viewed as competitors. We don't really look at it that way. Interoperability is at the core of everything that we do at Trimble, and it's also at the core of everything that the Federal Highways is saying we should be doing. You should be doing as agencies for transportation and roads, highways, and bridge. This is an example of why that interoperability is important. It's not just between Trimble systems. And by the way, something like a connected data environment that you see there under Quadri, there's going to be many of those. There's not going to be one solution that does everything for the agency, right? So use the best of breed solutions to execute the phase of the asset lifecycle continuum that you're in, and let the data move in and out where it needs to be in the format it needs to be in, so that it can be consumed to create the best outcomes for your agency. So with that, I'm going to turn it to my friend Pat, and he's going to start talking more about the grant.
Thank you, Doug. Number 2, why you should apply for ADCMS funding. Well, as a basic premise, why you should apply for ADCMS funding is funding. You know, there's $34 million available for this first round within ADCMS. But I think also it'll help your general approach to project delivery, and then just the development of your STIP. When I worked in public service, coordinating grant efforts on projects and then programs, I found that when I came up short within a US DOT program for a grant, I would, and I set up the dreaded phone call with US DOT for my debrief. I would hear three things. First, always the positive statement. You made the secretary's desk was usually the first thing they'd say. And then the second and third things that they'd say would be the observations on why you came up short. In their view, a project wouldn't be deemed as transformative. Or another second reason would be invariably that the benefits were outweighed by the costs. When you get to know the ADCMS program and the policy behind it, I think it'll help you with your other grant submissions, even beyond an ADCMS submission. So long as you follow the NOFO, and I'll get to a little bit of that. This NOFO will hinge on interoperability. You take the arguments away when it comes to transformation, or whether you're not being cost conscious, because as Doug said, don't take FHWA's word for it. You're being innovative because you're following EDC 6, and interoperability is really the hinge on this round, but also at that kind of definition for transformation. At Trimble, we believe that it is a single source of truth through the life cycle of a project that is that definition of interoperability. And then that project then informs the program. But what does that look like? That's a big concept. And what's the first step? And so that's what this slide right here is. It gets at a visualization of that. And this is our handheld tool, Sight Vision, which we allow for visualization and inspection of complex 3D data sets in the field. And then this 3D data can be shown in Trimble Connect, which is our clearinghouse, and then can be downloaded from Connect and into the field. All this means is just the idea of taking data through different parts of the life cycle with different partners. This handheld device could be used within public engagement, can be used within design, can be used within construction, can be used within asset management by lots of different partners. And it's just the idea of we're moving data through the life cycle. And in under the FHWA BIM national strategy, they would suggest to kind of take an approach where it's crawl, walk, run, and run meaning you're focusing on the CDE, but walk would be something like this, where it's just this idea of we're acknowledging that the information from design can go through the full life cycle. Next slide. And then this is an example of it at the project level, or interoperability at the project level. This is the Consumnes Bridge Replacement Project that was done by Caltrans and then by Granite. This was actually a project we got engaged on a year into the process. So the idea that you can incorporate BIM from its inception just isn't true. You can incorporate it at any point within the project in terms of project delivery. But this is a really interesting project. We incorporated some aspects of Sight Vision, but also the bridge were designed in Tekla. The road corridors were done in Civil 3D. The point cloud and data was incorporated within the model, and the ortho imagery, which is just the aerial pictures of it, were overlaid on the final surfaces, and the metadata was added to structures as part of the as-built. Long story short, this is just the idea that you have all these disparate technologies and data, and to integrate it into an as-built, where it's a model that can be used by the general contractor and then also within asset management. And this was an initial project they were able to do that on. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Stacy Maynard, who can give an overview of the NOFO. Stacy?
Thanks, Pat. Now that we have those great examples of interoperability, puts us in the right frame of mind to view the NOFO and some of the more specifics about the program. So as Pat mentioned, this program aligns with the Everyday Counts round 6 that just finished up, promoting 3D modeling, digital as-builts. And it also puts into actions the goals and the objectives of the National Strategic BIM Roadmap. So it emphasizes how those BIM practices are fundamental to the objectives of data interoperability and also data integration. So this is what, when you're trying to view this program, just keep all of that in mind as you start to develop your project descriptions. You want to tie that into the interoperability focus. And since this is a new program under the bipartisan infrastructure law, it has elements, with any new program, we're always trying to figure out what the agencies are looking for. And in this one, it has openness to both a project-based or a program-based submission. So it's a great opportunity, depending on wherever your agency is at, that you should look to tailor your project description to how interoperability can help get your agency to where you want to go and to achieve your objectives. So now we can take a look at some specifics of the NOFO. Since you're here, you know that this is the eligible applicants are state DOTs, but this does continue the US DOT's general emphasis on partnerships. So we're happy that some of our local public agencies are also viewing the webinar as well. It presents a great opportunity to work with your state DOTs on forwarding your own digital roadmap. So within your localities, but also across the state. Another unique aspect of this program is the focus on partnerships with the private sector. So this, as we see Trimble's role, is we can help with relevant project experience and also industry expertise. So this will help strengthen your application. In addition to the priorities, there's also some additional selected considerations, and that area does emphasize partnerships and industry expertise. They've made it easy as far as multiple applications, so you can leverage this partnership angle. So up to 3 applications per fiscal year. So it's great to take advantage of these different opportunities. We are now approaching the end of the submission deadline as it gets closer to summer, and August 28th is the submission. So it's a great time for you to be nailing down those project descriptions and seeing how you can build out your application. As was mentioned earlier, there's $34 million available for this round. It's a combined round for fiscal year 22 and 23. And this will set you up nicely for the successive rounds in the future, where there's up to $17 million available. This would also lend itself to, when you're doing your initial grant application for round 1, taking a look at where you want to go and possibly putting that into your application, even at a high level, so that USDOT can see that you're envisioning this program continuing and moving forward. You're not just looking for technology implementation this only in 1 year, but how it's going to help you advance your goals in the future.
Hey, Stacy, could I ask a
Yes.
question?
Yes.
We do have a lot of people from local public agencies on, and we had a discussion internally about this, and what can you guys think of an example, or Pat, maybe back when you were working for Nawaka or something, can you, and putting you on the spot a little bit here, so I apologize, but do we have an example of like how a state and a local municipality could work together? Is there like a certain type of project, or is there a certain a situation that could lend itself well to a situation like that?
Stacy, you want to take that first?
Well, I think it's, what you could do is you have a project, you have a specific project in mind, and then you work with the agency in order to get your, help with the agency would be the pass through for the state DOT for the funding and some of the reporting mechanisms. So it alleviates that burden somewhat, and provides an opportunity for what your experience is to be leveraged into other localities that can learn from your experience as well, to scale that up across the state.
One of the things that brought this up for me is because I can think of a kind of like a multi-state submission that's going to happen for this, which I can't talk about who or whatever, but is there strength in numbers and when applying for something like this, where if it's local, local and DOT or multiple
Well,
DOTs?
it's Doug, I'd say first there's strength in localities.
Right.
My experience was just, with whether you're an LPA or an MPO, these can be existential grant submissions and probably have a great deal of experience in developing project descriptions for the DOTs. Within the FAQ for ADCMS, they do suggest that the project is on the tip. So if you're a locality, there's that. If you have a project that's on the tip and you are part of the local match, great. That's something that you'd be working with your state DOT on. Also, I just think the sweat equity. LPAs are, like I said, they're used to developing project descriptions, and so that's a big added value to a state DOT that's thinking of submitting, but has also competing interests. They have other programs that they are looking to submit on in the same time frame. So you could be a real partner to the state DOT if you're a locality and there's a project that you like that's on the tip. I think it, generally speaking, you'd have that relationship with your district, your state DOT district, and then usually the liaison for the LPA to the DOT, to kind of coordinate and liaison. But I do think time is of the essence. I mean, there's only 6 weeks left. And at the end of the day, it's a state DOT that would be pressing send on the grant through ADCMS. But, for an MPO in a locality, I don't think it's that much of a heavy lift. It's just a matter of being an advocate for yourself on that your project is of national and regional significance to be included.
That was great. Thank you, guys. Sorry for the curveball, but we had talked about this, so I didn't think you would mind.
Yeah, no, and I think also the just it does strengthen your application in that it aligns with the overall. I'm going to speak to that next. The overall priorities with USDOT of partnerships. So it is seen as another consideration for that as well. And the award size too, the 1 to 5 million, could be beneficial for local public agencies as well. It kind of gives an open opportunity depending on your project size and your period of performance as well. That may lend itself to some of the local projects that may be closer to being implemented. So
thank you both.
Great. And as I mentioned, let's take a look right now at when you're, there are 3 main parts for your grant application. There's the narrative, the budget, and data to support why your project should get funded. So it's up to you as an agency to craft your story and align your narrative with the priorities that are outlined in the program and that align with the USDOT and federal highway goals. So we'll just take a walk through some of these right now, so then you can see how these can be woven into your application. So safety, leveraging automated, and connected machinery results in less time on the construction site. So increasing safety for workers, not only on the site, but also the traveling public. And then for climate change, sustainability, when you have more efficient construction practices and projects, it lessens the environmental footprint and the impact not only at the site, but in the surrounding communities. So machine control, less rework, all of these just decrease the environmental impact with less emissions and less particulates released into the environment. So this also lends itself nicely into the equity aspect, where if you can make that impact in your surrounding communities and have less environmental issues going on, that is also a bonus. And as we've seen, equity is a primary component for these grant applications. I think it was in the RAISE funding awards for FY22, over 70% of the projects had some element in an equity area. So that's important to keep in mind when you are thinking about your project descriptions and possible locations. Also, as tying in both the sustainability aspect too, Doug mentioned earlier with that great graph that had about the data loss and putting data throughout the entire life cycle of your project. If you're able to do that, it results in more sustainable management of your assets. So that's seen as an added benefit as well, that the funding will be seen further and further along in the life cycle. So using that data in different ways and in all the different stages of the life cycle allows agencies to have greater public engagement. You can use that information, that data can be stored and shared with the general public. It can be used for meetings, for data visualization. That increases your outreach to all your stakeholders and allows for feedback throughout the different stages of the project. And that's an important element that DOT views as far as trying to get that engagement throughout the whole entire process. And when we were talking about the project locations that in the recently awarded grant programs, there's always a focus on the areas of persistent poverty and historically disadvantaged communities, as well as rural areas. And USDOT has some great tools that they've implemented to help you with looking at project locations and how those may come into play with those types of areas. So we can help if you have any issues utilizing those tools as well. And equity also lends itself into the workforce development and wealth creation. You have to think about how some of your existing programs that you have, apprenticeships, community college engagement, how you can use that weave that into your application to show that connection. Another area to look at is future opportunities for underserved communities. So have that forward-looking approach, not just what you can do right now, but as we were talking about, how you can look towards the future for your other applications and future rounds of the ADCMS program. So we've spoken about how it ties into the whole partnership angle, giving your application a competitive advantage by leveraging the project experience and industry expertise of industry. And this is similar to what we saw with the SMART grant program. That was another new program under the bipartisan infrastructure law, and seeing some success there with that leveraging of the industry so that this technology and these solutions can be scaled and leveraged quicker across the country. So just remember when you're looking at these types of elements in your grant application to be forward-looking, promoting the narrative of your industry, and also how it aligns with the strategic national BIM roadmap that we spoke about earlier.
Stacy, 1 second. This is Pat.
Sure.
Just something to think about is maybe for the group on the call, that if maybe there's some way even they communicate if by a poll question or maybe in the chat box, if they also are thinking of submitting not just an ADCMS, but they're also in the midst of evaluating the mega infra rural submissions that are due in August. And because this might not be something that would readily occur to someone that you can maybe submit thinking like they're two ships heading in the same direction. I'd be curious to know. So maybe during the question or answer session here, maybe if any folks had, I don't know, if they're thinking to participate in those programs, that would be interesting to know.
Sure, that leads to my next topic, which was talking about what Pat just mentioned. The idea of incorporating that innovative technology that you would be implementing from this program into your applications, into your project descriptions for several of these programs, which are also coming up for the deadline for submission is at the end of August as well. So the multimodal project discretionary program, which is one program that encapsulates the 3 different grant opportunities, mega, infra, and rural, that you can all do in one streamlined application. So think of how you could use ADCMS to leverage that as well. I'm sure many of you already have existing applications that you may be resubmitting, so you can, by incorporating some of this innovative technology into your project description, it would set you apart from previous applications or other applicants. The other one is another new program under Bill, which is the Protect Discretionary Grant Program. Now, there is also, you may be more familiar with the Protect Formula Funds, but these are actually competitive discretionary grant funds that you can use to promote some of your efforts on the resilience and sustainability for the Protect activities that would be encapsulated. So it's a great opportunity. And as Pat said, if you would like to tell us or share what, how you might be leveraging it, or if you are going to be applying for these other grant programs, that would be great to know. So yes, thanks. Now we can move on. Now that we talked about how to position your agency, we can try to encourage you even more about why you should do this. The grant program, the grant submission is not a long application, 15 pages, and it has the basics of the narrative, budget, and supporting documentation if needed. So you have to view it as not only a good way to fund the technology that you want to promote your efforts and your digital roadmap, but also how it can move you forward from where you are. We've talked about the EDC 6 and where every agency is at a different stage. So view it as telling your story from what stage you are and how it can move you forward. Applications are welcome for all the various different stages. So it's good to think of that as that your application is just as important no matter what level you're at on your journey. The next is it shows your commitment and partnership to meeting the goals of the BIM national strategy by even just engaging and submitting an application. So we encourage you to do that. At the same time, you can also reap the benefits of the interoperability within your workflow and systems by implementing this technology. So you can gain greater efficiencies, utilization of the data that you collect, you process, you analyze, and that will help your agency make faster, more informed decisions at every stage of the asset lifecycle management. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. And now Pat is going to offer you some insight into how Trimble can help you on this journey.
How can we help? First, we could just run the traps on the ADCMS NOFO and also within your project description. Nick, can you go to the next slide? But at the end of the day, grant writing is competing. And I learned the trade craft of grant writing and grew to appreciate a great deal over the last 20 years. It can feel existential. You're tackling big issues. And as I said, it's never fun to do a US DOT debrief where you learn how competitive the process is, of the number of applications, and you see how close you were between getting over the finish line. But at the end of the day, US DOT really rewards folks for competing and hanging in there and going and thinking, how am I going to improve my application from round to round to round? And in the case of ADCMS, you have the fortunate case of this is round one for this grant program. And so there's an argument to be being made for submitting here in round one and just competing. And then also in that same way, think about how ADCMS can also inform your submissions into other programs. I recently just finished a great book from Pete Carroll about competing, and it's called Win Forever. And I loved it. It really made me think about government affairs and how to approach grant writing, to be honest with you, that there's really no good or bad. There's only competing, and also just the unmistakable belief that something special is going to happen. And with each submission that you make, you have the opportunity to really make something special happen for your state or for your locality to help solve an important question of real consequence. But it begins with just competing. And I recognize, and Stacy we both recognize how tough grant writing is. And it's a tough process. And so for nothing else, it's to help you all out first with the mindset of what's required in the submission, whether it's just the nuts and bolts of grant writing or the mindsets you need to have just for ADCMS in round one and interoperability. Next slide. And then also, Trimble, what can we provide in terms of specifics? Well, first, as a basic premise within the NOFO, it's that we're happy to be your industry partner as you think about your submission, to tighten up your project description, but also specific technical assistance in the grant. We were also happy to answer questions on grants.gov, which can sometimes be a little arduous, to say the least. Please take that seriously. Nothing is worse than having spent weeks on a grant submission and just now recognizing the ins and outs of grants.gov. We were happy to help you out on that. The very first grant I ever submitted in Tiger low many years ago was through grants.gov, and in my agency we had a point of contact that was away on vacation when we needed that submission, and it was her email address, or his or her, I don't want to give it away, that was the point of contact for grants.gov, and we couldn't submit. It's those types of things that kind of run the traps on, to kind of think ahead of everything that can possibly go wrong, to help you out so you can press send on that application in order to compete. We're happy to provide, and this is provided gratis as Trimble. We just see ourselves as a source of information and innovation to you. You are our partners, and we want to help you out. And so in terms of next steps, please just reach out to either Stacy or myself, and Doug as well. And we're happy to answer any questions, Nick. Thank you. Team, did you also should revise and extend if my team wanted to revise and extend my remarks at all? Stacy or Doug, before turning to questions?
I think you nailed it, Pat.
All right.
Great job, everybody. For everyone on attendance, we do have right now about 15 minutes of opportunities to submit some questions and things like that. So if these are the people to ask the questions to. If you got grant questions, we did see at the start with the poll that almost 40% are still looking and not really totally sure what to apply for. So hopefully this gave some information, and it'd be nice. I should make another poll to see if this now cleared it up and if that number would drop down to if people now know what to apply for. But one that we have is, since this ADCMS is a new grant program, and I'll throw this out to anybody, any one of you three can answer all of these questions. How can we educate others within our agency about the benefits of applying for these grant programs? So internally, how do you sell it?
Yeah,
go for it, Stacey. Have
I
at
was
it.
I was just going to say, because this is a new program, you do have to do that educational element to get buy-in from various departments, leadership. So it's important to have your information and your story ready to go for that. And so I guess what I would suggest is looking at some of those. You have the tie-in with the National Strategic Roadmap. You have some of those resources from EDC6 to show where your state is and where you can move to. They have some great visuals on the final report from EDC6. So it gives a visual. Sometimes that's easier to tell the story of this is where we hope to be moving forward. And I also, if you need any help, we also would be more than happy to help with some language or anything that might help in telling that story. But there's a lot of great resources, and also leveraging. I know a lot of state DOTs do apply for other great grant programs. So making sure to emphasize how this can help with those other grant applications as well.
Yeah, we're being specific to ADCMS for this particular presentation, but we've assisted many DOTs with other types of grant applications, successful grant applications as well.
Doug, and this is just following up on Stacy. This is my unshakable belief of just hanging in there on your submissions. One great way to educate your agency is just this US DOT on their website for infra includes every submission that the states have submitted in some of these kind of larger programs, such as infra or the rural grants program or the mega program. And all the very different variations for the last 10 years. And you can see every project that has been submitted and the most recent project submissions that are made. nothing is, if you believe, and I do, that if you just hang in there and you just keep resubmitting, eventually, you're gonna get funding. It does have a requirement though, the person that's submitting to change the project description round to round. And so in that way, if you looked at just your most recent infra round or any other program for that matter, pull up those projects and reach out to the person who coordinated that grant and say, you know what, for this next round, if you just included these 2 new sentences within your project description, which get at innovation and improve your benefit cost analysis within your submission. Oh, and by the way, if you submit both of them together in this new program, now your project has a different frame than it had before. That's different. I mean, it's just an idea. A great way to kind of educate the people at your agency is to win and to change the dynamic where you have a winning submission for what was previously a one that came up short. Because that's something I used to struggle with, was just round to round to round. How are we going to make this application look any different?
Going a
I
little
like that
nuts.
you mentioned the BCA rating. Oh, sorry, Nick. Just
No,
real
it's good.
quickly, I
All
like that
good.
you mentioned the BCA rating because that's the first time we've mentioned it in this webinar, and it's like that rating is highly influential. And this is something that both you and Stacy have a lot of experience in helping agencies raise their BCS or raise their rating so that they can get more grants.
It's an archaic rating, and it's the one objective term that you can have within a project submission. And there's nothing that gets at that like innovation. You to really get at the costs within that project. And so, and by the way, as you said, Doug, who am I to say? This is FHWA that says that this is a way to cut costs. So, good question.
Doug, you mentioned I think it was maybe a misstep, but you said the BCS, and then Patrick immediately followed that up with saying it's an antiquated system. And so I've just
right, the BCS,
the BCS antiquated college football.
Yeah, exactly.
You can guess what I was thinking about, right? Like we're not far from training camp starting.
Yeah.
Asking a little nuts and bolts question here. Are there any logistical things to be aware of when submitting the application?
Sure, I think I'll take that one. So, reading through the NOFO, they're always quite lengthy, and I think there must be a requirement that it has to be at least 30 pages in order to be issued. But one of the most important parts I would say is ensuring that your unique your UEI, your unique entity identifier number that your agency has in SAM, that you have that information and that you register at grants.gov. And that process can take 2 to 4 weeks. So you should definitely register now, even if you're not sure. It's just good to do it. You'll have it for the future. Most grant applications for the Department of Transportation are done through that, although they have thrown a wrench every now and then by using some other programs. But I would go ahead and do the grants.gov submission, the registration now, and also then ensure that you have 1 or 2 people who can do the submission. You'll run into problems where someone's on vacation, and as Pat was, I think, saying before too, you don't know whose password it is or whose email is registered. So those are just some nuts and bolts to make sure that you have that all done, and that and then always taking a read through to make sure you have all the supporting documentation that's necessary. But the application is not so cumbersome, and should approach it with the attitude of, it's a new program, I'm going to tell my story. And the NOFO speaks to USDOT getting in contact with applicants as well for questions. So, take that as a positive sign that your application, there, may be some conversation to promote some of your efforts. So that's a positive. It's not just a cut and dry submission. So that would be my advice on that one.
Stacy, you brought up vacation time. So the deadline is August 28th. So are Patrick, Doug, Stacy, any of you taking any vacation? If people have questions between now and then, all the emails are up there, and then they all 3 willingly gave their emails out. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to them. But any vacations planned?
We're sleeping in September, and I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, so it's just don't worry about it. We've, you know, my Sundays are, I'd rather be doing this, I think. So
Yeah, looking forward to seeing how we can help with any questions or project description development or just language. You know, we, as Pat mentioned, we're willing to help and support you. And we just want to see that agencies submit these applications and that the funding gets used.
And, you know, Nick, if I could just offer that to that, you know, in a former life, I would try to like discern, you know, from FHWA, like what's the winning answer and like what is the project description they want to see. And yes, we need to frame it to reflect the program and the program goals, but I can't stress enough the importance of the applicant really taking to heart what they need and where they want to go. And then in that same way, how they are viewed by FHWA, that there's a narrative that they may not fully appreciate, that we can be helpful in vetting out, that's kind of forward leaning on how FHWA would view you, giving yourself credit for things that you may not think that you've done, but you've done, like having strategic plans or that things that you've done within this space, you deserve to get credit on. And it helps shape kind of the narrative of who you are and where you are on the journey in submitting. And I can't stress enough that this is a program that's based on need. And so in that way, irregardless of where you are on the journey, this program is being created to help you. And so this is not a program just for folks because you are at X part of the journey. Just think to yourself and be honest about where you are and where you want to go.
Looks like that's all the questions we have, but Pat, that was a great final statement. Doug,
Yep.
Stacy, anything else to add before we wrap up for the day?
I'm good.
I have,
Thank you.
You know, my one last thing is just an antidote about how, you know, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, how that there was money left on the table for the planning grants because they didn't get enough people to apply. And they actually went out and tried to contact people. If parts of their application were missing, they tried to give the money away. So just once again, apply and let's not leave the money on the table. So just wanted to emphasize that because you don't think it would happen, but we've seen that it can happen. So.
Awesome. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for everyone for joining the webinar. Props to Pat, Stacy, Doug, putting on a great presentation. Once again, video and slides are going to be available in the next couple of days, so feel free to share them to other colleagues or other internal people who you feel like this would be really valuable to watch. That deadline again, August 28th, coming up, not that far away. If you have any additional questions, all the emails right there. Feel free to reach out to anybody. But yeah, outside of that, thanks everybody again for joining, and we'll see you for our next webinar coming up here in the next handful of weeks.
Thank you.